Welcome to the Work is the Work podcast. My name is Neal Bailey-Harper. This is a brand new venture for us, new space, okay? Thank you for listening to me on Anchor, Google, Spotify, all of those. This is a podcast about conversations and about the work we do in life. And I believe the real celebrities are the people you know every day. They're not people you don't know. The real celebrities are the people you know every day. So with that being said, I could not think of it. Oh, I'm sorry. That's Ella. I'm beginning to see the light. That's the music of Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie. I want to start today with this new podcast. And for those of you guys who've listened to me over the years, I've done a lot of audio podcasts based on finding my father's family. And then I did one called Father's Family Found. And another one called Based on a True Story. Well, the true story is sitting right next to me. This is my brother, Fred. This is my brother, Fred. I am Neal Bailey-Harper. This is Fred Bailey. Thank you for coming on my show, brother.
Absolutely.
I thought that it's something to meet your family after 60-something years of your life. It's something to meet your brother after being 64. It's another thing to becoming brothers.
That's true. That's very true.
So at this point in time, we have become brothers. And before I go any further, and I'm going to let Fred talk for a minute, I need to thank someone. Let me see, I started with 11 siblings. Now I think I'm up to about 14
or more.
Or more. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah. So we're calling this episode Open Secrets because we're being open with each other about the secrets in life. And I want to thank my sister, Mickey, formerly Anita Crandall. But Mickey is if we go by numbers, I'm the 8th born, Mickey's the 7th born. And she's always looked out after me my whole life. Not that anybody else has it, but she was right there. And Mickey is the reason I'm sitting here with Fred. Because for 40-something years, Mickey and I decided that one of our goals was to find our father. Find somebody in our father's family. And while I can talk about it and do a lot of things else to do that, Mickey actually did the grunt work. She actually did the logistics. She actually set the table. She actually kept me engaged to get to this point. The other person I want to say thank you to is Shelly. Yeah. Shelly Warren, who's my nephew's significant other. 3 years ago, Shelly gave little Freddie the gift of ancestry. And ancestry is the reason why we're sitting here today.
Right.
So, talk to me, man. Glad you're here.
Well, listen, good to be here, first of all. I'm the patriot of this family.
That's true.
So if he's down with 14, I must down. I'm gonna weigh like over 40.
Yeah.
But to make the very beginning, and our grandparents, Clarence Golden and Victoria Bailey, had 12 kids.
Well, okay.
So we all have at least 12 aunts.
Right. And
most of whom are still living.
Oh, really?
Yeah, several of them are still living, assisted living.
Okay, but they're alive.
But
they're
whatever.
Alive. Yeah.
I was probably the last person to catch on to the ancestry thing.
Okay.
Because I resisted that kind of investigation, because I'm an investigator. I've been.
Oh yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Little background. Tell them who you are. Okay. You're retired.
I'm a retired detective sergeant from Philadelphia. I also worked at the Department of Environmental Protection as an environmental detective. I worked for the District Attorney's Office in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, as an investigator. And I mean, it's what I do. I had a private detective agency for 22 years. So all I've done is investigations. But my children, Fred Jr. and Leah, were adamant about Dad, you got to contact me. And at the time, I'm living in Panama, retired.
Yeah, that's another thing. I'll get to that.
Yeah.
That's another thing, living in Panama thing. But here's something that I want you to put in your mind while he's telling you all of this.
Right.
He was a police officer in Philadelphia. And for those of you who are familiar, in Frank Rizzo's Philadelphia.
Yes.
Apparently, we talked in our conversation, we found out that you were an officer kind of in my neighborhood. Or in that neighborhood, or where were you at?
Oh yeah, when I first came on the police department, I worked North Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Also my neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know?
And we are a generation apart in age.
Yes.
So I could have been doing some shit that he could have been trying to find out about. So
yeah.
Okay, now go ahead.
Yeah. 17th and Norris.
17th and Norris. To those of you who remember, that's the area called the Valley, right?
Right.
I lived at 21st and Master Street, which was DeMarco's.
Yes.
The club in my neighborhood was the DeMarco's.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay.
So the DeMarcos were kind of active during that time.
Yeah. They were helping the neighborhood, yes.
But I started out in the police department after being discharged as a Vietnam veteran, and I chose that police department because in 20 years you could retire.
Yeah.
With a half a year of your retirement being your annual pay.
So half of what you got,
half of your annual pay.
Wow. So
You
they're
could
saying
retire with.
by making it to 20 years, that was service enough.
Right.
So most cops that came right out of college or from Vietnam retired in their 40s from the police department.
Right. They could retire at 45.
Wow.
You know.
Wow.
So, but I was down with that because,
yeah.
of course, that was I wanted to learn investigations.
Okay.
Of course, I knew I could hustle that into an agency, you know, and so when I heard about it, I was, you know, like they say in the city, scared.
Yeah.
I was scared.
Yeah.
That I wasn't going to like my new family.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, I hope I like them," you know, because that's very important.
Yeah,
it's very important.
It's. I will say we've known each other for 3 years, and we agreed that when we're talking today, we're going to talk about the history of our father, but we're really going to pick up our life when we met.
Right.
And when you told me that last night, I got a kind of kick out of it because I know a lot of you guys that have gone through what we're going through, have found siblings or parents or something after a long period of time. Maybe subconsciously you think about it, but it's like, hey, this is my brother, great, but what if I don't like him?
Yeah.
You know, what if we don't like
That's
each other?
Scary, man.
It is. That's
you know, because now you got them.
Now, you open the door. You open the doors. and how fast, and this is a real thing for me too, how fast do you trust?
Yeah, right.
How fast do you open up?
Well, you have to come together.
Right.
That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
You have to believe in each other, give each other a shot.
Yeah. You gotta.
You know what I mean?
And everybody processes giving somebody else a shot differently.
That's right.
You know, I will say this: when I found out that little Freddie and I had 15-16% DNA match,
right?
I called him on the phone, and I left a message. It was late at night. I did that intentionally because I didn't want to talk that night.
Right.
The next morning, I got a response from Freddie, and he said, "Hey, Unc, how you doing?" And I said, no, I think we're cousins, Freddie. He said, no, you're my uncle. I said, well, I really think because he says, no, you're my dad's brother. And my dad is still alive.
Right.
Now, my grandmother, and that's a whole nother story, but I will say this. When I was young, my grandmother told me I had a brother named Fred. So all I knew was the name Fred.
Right.
So when Freddie called me and told me that,
right.
I was excited. But then Freddie also told me, I said, where is he? And he said, he's in Panama. And before I could say Panama City, thinking Florida, he said, no, he's in Panama. And then he sent me the first picture of our father that I'd ever seen.
Okay.
Our father died in July 31st, 1965.
Okay.
I was 7. He was a young adult. And then Freddie called me back 10 minutes later and said, hey, he told you. And he was real excited, but that you didn't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
which I didn't know where that was going.
Yeah.
But,
because I had to know where to start with this conversation.
Right. Yeah.
Do I start with, who are you?
Yeah.
Or do I start
being an
with,
investigator?
glad to see you. You know, like, you know. But it took me a couple of weeks or so, and then I realized it was too important.
The story I got, I'm gonna tell you the story I got. The story I got was that you didn't want to talk to me on the phone. So those couple of weeks while you were contemplating, I was told that you didn't want to talk on the phone. You just wanted to see each other. You just wanted to see me before that. Okay, so open secrets.
But
either way,
I recall that part, but whatever.
Well, that came from Freddie. So
right. Okay. But when I thought about it, in fact, what was the occasion that we connected? Was there something? Somebody had something.
No, I think it was basically that you just gave us a date when you could get.
When I would come to the city.
Right. You were just getting a date when you could come to the city.
Okay.
So we were open to it, whatever.
Okay.
It became an occasion when you got here, but it was just when could you get here? That's how that was. Yeah. And it took about 3 weeks.
But at that time, like you pick up on mannerisms. And the tongue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the ideas that seem to come from other people. That are familiar to you. The ideas were familiar to me. When you told me what you were doing, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Well, when I actually heard that you lived in Panama, I kind of selfishly thought, that might be some shit I would do. That's certain. I'm going through what I'm thinking is a midlife crisis at 60, thinking about where am I going.
Yeah.
And here's somebody I find out is my brother, who at 78 decided to make a move to Panama.
Right.
That's a no fear move. That's a no fear move. So
I just saw a space in my life where I could make that move.
Why Panama?
Well, I had been to Panama.
Okay.
And I had been to Costa Rica.
Okay.
And Cuba.
Okay.
And all of those places. Colombia, I had been there.
Okay.
Through my course of work, investigations, like missing children.
Oh, really? Okay.
And things from the States, and they, like Italian fathers don't like to give up their kids.
Yeah.
So there's a divorce, and boom, you take the kids and go to Colombia.
Oh, so then okay. No internet then, so you have to chase
Right.
Okay, I want to go somewhere else now. Since we talked about that, what about this? I'm going to play just 10 seconds of this song so you guys can understand where we're going. This is Horace Silver.
Okay.
The song is Song for My Father.
Okay.
Understand, I did not, at 11 years old, I'm growing up in Philadelphia, and I worked in a grocery store. And I was told that I looked just like my father. I'd never seen my father. And quite honestly, that used to piss me off after a while.
Right.
It started to really piss me off. That people who kept saying that you look just like your father, but you never seen him. So we were talking about mannerisms. We met in the parking lot of the house my wife and I, the woman I'm related to by marriage and I live in.
Right.
We met, and the first time that we saw each other, the thing that got me was the body types. Little matter. You understand now, if you don't know anybody on the male side of your family, it's kind of hard to visualize. So when you see them, and it's not so much that, well, even though I think now we might look alike,
right?
When you see them and you actually see the way their hands move, or their way, that kind of freaked me out a little bit. It did.
But I had that feeling with all of your boys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could relate to all of your boys.
Yeah, and they could relate to you too. That was the thing about that, was they both had mentioned to me that they were planning. They knew you guys were coming, and they planned on coming for a little while. But then when they saw everybody and felt what they felt, that changed.
Right.
And the other thing we talked about this recently too was the name. Okay,
Yes.
Fred Bailey, Neal Bailey-Harper. Let me clear something up. That's not my wife's name. Harper is not my wife's name.
Right.
Harper was what I thought was my last name as a child. Born in Women's Medical Hospital in Philadelphia. The birth certificate's on the back, and probably on the back of any birth certificate, I don't know, give you a place for corrections. My birth certificate, my name said Neal B. Harper. Bailey was thought to be my middle name, to me. Until I got a birth certificate and looked on the back and saw it was Bailey, was my real last name. So when you guys came and my boys got to meet Bailey men, they one of them eventually told me, say, Dad, we had talked about it. Baby changing their last name. Just to Bailey.
Yeah,
okay.
But on that feature, when I was in the hospital, my first name was supposed to be Anson.
Oh, really?
The nurse said, that must be an error. Of course, it's Anson Frederick Bailey. She changed it.
Oh, really?
To Frederick Anson Bailey. So everybody was surprised when we saw when they saw the birth certificate, because that wasn't the name they had given. It was supposed to be Anson.
And I thought I was naming my son, my youngest son, Detroit. I thought I was naming him after our father. Just like my sister named her son Detroit. We thought we were naming him after our father, but his name was Detroit. Like the city. Too late to change it now.
And I just recently told you how that came about.
Tell me again. Tell me again,
our grandparents were fleeing the South. And Detroit was born while the train was in Detroit, going through Detroit. And they had to have a name to get off and not be checked out as runaway slaves.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's right.
And so they said, well, let's treat Detroit. And the guy let him slide, I guess.
Wow.
How
much did that happen? I imagine that happened a lot. Again, when I'm talking about open secrets, I always say that. Just with me finding out who I was, I always felt like within my neighborhood, I would see all different people come in and say, hey, little Detroit. Now, some of the people might have known one side of the story. Some people might know the other side of the story. But I think consciously they weren't talking to each other because they didn't want to.
I tell you. So and it's a story that went around in North Philadelphia. Circles and all the gambling halls. Because Detroit was a gambler.
Okay. And so that was pre-speakeasy, or were these really speakeasy?
No, these were casinos.
Home casinos.
He had casinos. They had a house on Kamak and Norris. That had 7 rooms in it, and I wasn't allowed in there. but there was a pool table in each room, and
so nobody lived there.
Woman in there.
It was
nobody lived in there at all.
Okay.
There were women up there, and
serving drinks.
Yeah.
Serving drinks. Yeah.
And all the dice guys. There was a check-in guy. His name was Ringo.
Okay.
Charlie Ringo, because I knew his son. But he used to sit on the steps to make everybody put up at least $40 to come in and start the game. You had to have.
So these were word of mouth places.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't have a sign over there, but he was paying off the police.
So we also talked. This is another thing that fascinated me. Our father was a man of the times. We'll put it that way.
Oh, no question.
Yeah, he was a man of the times.
No question.
I guess if I was your age, at the same time, it'd have been a matter of you have choices to make.
Right.
So his dad doing casinos, gambling, man, and I'm sure gambling wasn't legal at the time.
Right.
And all this stuff like that. But you chose to become a cop.
Right.
That's a fine line to walk.
Yeah.
That's a fun.
Well,
Go ahead. Yeah.
I really didn't identify as a cop.
Right.
I went to work in a uniform, but I was working in my own neighborhood.
Okay.
I knew everybody in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay.
And like the girls used to go down in the subway and turn tricks on Broad and Gerard.
Yeah.
Well, I knew that because that's the way I went to school.
Right.
So I knew what they was doing.
So as a police officer, you just
it was easy. I said, "Get out of here!"
Yeah.
Okay. I said, "You better come out the other side."
Before you got back as a police officer, I need to ask you about something that, to me and to most guys of my age at that time, scared the shit out of us, and that was Vietnam.
Yeah.
Understand, if you were born in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a draft.
Right.
The United States had a draft, a military draft. You were drafted into service.
Right.
When I was a sophomore in high school, the draft was still prevalent.
Right.
I got to be a junior in high school, the draft was still there.
Absolutely.
I was scared shitless that the draft was going to be there.
I hear you.
As a senior. My younger brother and I used to joke, Billy would say, I'll shoot my toe off. I can lose the toe. Yeah. Keep them going. From what I heard from people that went in our neighborhood, that were one way when they left and another way when they came back.
Right.
That even scared me more.
Right.
What was that like?
Well, for me, I came in and I stayed in a hotel in Saigon for 2 or 3 months waiting for my major, who was taking classes, to come, and we had a helicopter with which we had to do our surveillances with, and track people who we thought may have been the enemy.
So that was different from the average guy who came to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Because I heard.
When I got there, I walked out. I had on civilian clothes when I first got to Saigon. I walked around and got to know those people, and they were cool to me. You know what I mean? Those people were fine, but they were mostly Chinese.
Okay.
And they were very tall.
Really?
We didn't have tall Chinese in the U.S.
No.
They were all the merchants.
Taller than you and me now.
They were the merchants in Vietnam.
Okay. So
so
when guys would tell me about being dropped in a jungle, and with a gun, and come back for you in 13 months, is that?
It's all exaggeration.
And I asked you, what was the movie that mostly reminded you of anything like Vietnam? What was your answer?
The one with Marlon Brando were in it.
I think Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse, yeah.
That was crazy.
But when I finally began to do the grunt work, we had to secure the airport because the airport was the U.S. was digging up the airport so it could handle the heavy equipment that was coming in. So we had to give the airport circumference security. So that was like, it was like a 24-hour job.
So how long were you in the military?
Till 63, 64. Because at the time, Vietnam was only a 12-month tour.
Okay.
They tried to get you out of there within 12 months because they knew the effects it would have on you mentally.
Even though they didn't do anything about it once you got back.
Right.
They knew the effects.
Right.
Yeah.
The first thing I learned when I got there was when you're out in the field, you turn your clothes inside out and hang them up. And that way, when you get down, turn them on the right side, all the snakes will fall out.
Okay. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do now. Yeah.
You know, the warmth of your uniform and helmets and all of that stuff like that.
Oh,
they would breathe, and, you know.
Every single day?
Right, right. So you hung your clothes up on a tree limb inside out.
So, I always thought when you came back from Vietnam, that's when you became a police officer.
Yeah.
Which is a natural, I can see that transition. And as a police officer, like we were talking about it, you were telling me, there's nothing in these city streets that could scare you.
Right.
In the way Vietnam would.
Right.
So it's almost natural for people to come back and want to be, did they want to be police officers, or was that the only job they could get?
That was, well, most of them, that was the only job they would have gotten even before they went.
Okay.
Most of them went to college for a couple of years and they couldn't finish.
Right.
And they the best job payable
was police officer.
And I'll say at the time when I was on the police department, the annual salary was $6,400 and some dollars. And that was middle class in 1966.
That reminds me.
I bought a house for $11,000.
That reminds me of a Columbo episode. I used to watch Columbo all the time, and Columbo said that he was a lieutenant in L.A. and he was making $11,000 a year.
Yeah.
I was like, times they are $6,000 you could buy a house.
$6,000, man.
Wow.
And then the money went up as you know, as when depending who was commissioner and who was mayor. The mayor Tate raised the.
What was the percentage of black police officers?
Probably at that time was about 4 to 5%.
Okay, not a lot. And how were y'all treated within the department?
Well, very difficult, because we weren't allowed to make arrests in the white neighborhood, which was Northeast Philadelphia at the time. It was all white.
Okay.
And they had all white police over there. So, but on the west side of Broad Street, it was 80% black and the Latino.
So Northeast was predominantly white, but you went to Northeast High School.
Yeah, but I went to Northeast because our father, graduated from there.
So anybody from Philadelphia can understand. I went to Dobbins in the 70s. I'm a Mustang.
Yeah.
But in the 60s, we were going to Northeast High.
Right.
That's kind of wild.
Because it was all men, all boys, and we had trophies, and we had all the sports champions in our building.
Wow.
Adley sat next to me because
That's right, Herb. Herb was there. Herb Adley for you
all
Cowboy
the way
fans.
through school because you went A, B, C, D, you know.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
I forgot he was from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's talk about us. Learning how to be brothers.
Right.
First time Fred came to our house, my family was here. Fred is here. I had a couple of friends from North Carolina here, a couple of friends across the street. And I remember we got into a circle.
Right.
Before y'all went back to the hotel for that night.
Right.
And you said something that I recall about here's to what's ahead.
Yeah.
And I looked at it two different ways. Part of it was like, wow, here's somebody with my blood. Now you're the matriarch of the family.
Right.
Not me.
Right.
You know, which was good.
Right.
Because I don't know if I was ready for it.
Right.
And so, I will say this too, guys and ladies, if you're meeting family members in your life, and I'm not giving you advice, I'm just telling you how I deal with it. We paced our relationship. We wanted a relationship.
Yes.
I'm gonna talk about grits.
Yeah.
How many grits? Because Fred, the first thing when he went back, he stayed with me for a couple of days. And again, God's in the midst of this to me because you were supposed to go back home.
Right.
And then your plane, something got canceled, flight got canceled.
Right.
So we had to spend an extra day at my house, and it was just me and you.
Right.
And I think we sat at that table for about 9 or 10 hours. And I could tell there were some things you wanted to tell me, but I could tell you put the brakes on it because that's what I would do.
Right.
But when he got back to Panama, he asked me to send him some grits. And I was like, okay. You couldn't get them over there.
Right.
So I said, okay, how many want? Just give me a couple boxes. Now, grits at $3, $4 a box. So I said, okay, I'll send them to you.
Yeah.
He said, how much? I said, Fred, grits. I'll send you 2 boxes of grits. He said, how much? I said, Fred, your grits. I will send you 2 boxes of grits. And then he told me, he said, listen, if we're brothers and I want to have a relationship that builds, he said, I'm not trying to fuck this thing up by not paying for grits.
Right.
So I was like,
yeah.
I knew I was going to send you the grits. I didn't say, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But, and we talked gradually more and more.
Right.
Or just kept in touch anyhow.
Right.
Because I think, I know from my end and I feel from his end, we both just wanted to be brothers. We wanted to, once you get past that initial, they look like me, I like them.
And I would tell anyone, if this is your situation, you have to be all in.
Mm.
You can't half step when you find a family member that you never knew.
Yeah.
Either you in or you out.
Yeah. And part of it, to me, the other thing where I think was a blessing in disguise was that our age difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because not only could I meet you and talk to you, but I could actually meet my father through you.
Right.
And talk in that aspect. It gave me, because I was a pushy ass kid.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, I was pushy all the time. I wanted to ask things. I wanted to know things. And I never got a lot of answers for them. So it seemed like...
you wanted the answers, man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but the older you get, sometimes you realize you ain't going to get answers to things.
Yeah.
To everything. So you move on.
True.
And even in this situation, I don't get answers to everything, but I get a relationship.
Right.
So we've known of each other for at least 3 years. He's in my house now, been here for a week. We'll be here for a while. But it's now we're not acting like brothers.
Right.
We're brothers.
Right.
And I can say that again. You say you got to be 100% in, you do. You really do. Because my thing was, why would I chase it for 40 years?
Right.
To say hi and walk away.
Right. Absolutely.
Something, for me, I've learned that with a lot of the open secrets, some things you let go.
Yeah.
Some things you let go of. Because he's here, I'm here.
Right.
Get the most out of this. So if you're in that kind of situation, again, from the person who was the seeker,
Right.
You know, from the younger one of the group.
Right.
If you're in that kind of situation, you get the most out of the situation. You don't have to
right.
keep going back
That's right.
to what was it. Again, if you watch my podcast, you know I will tell you my journey. I'm not going to tell you my business. I'm not going to tell you my business. I'll tell you my journey.
Right.
And I believe I did a podcast recently, an audio podcast called The Cool Kids.
Yeah.
And everybody in their 20s and 30s, you're not cool yet.
Right.
These are the cool kids. These guys who've lived through 8 tracks, cassettes, albums, CDs, and I'm just using the technology that everybody will understand. To iPads, to now nothing's being touched. You don't have to touch anything anymore to send messages.
Right.
But talk to the people you know.
Well, I'll say one thing. If you have a situation that's close to ours, don't just keep investigating your spouse or who it is. I mean, like if you accept the DNA, if that's the way you do it, if you accept the mouth to work, you know, like accept it. If you say it's okay, let it be okay. Don't investigate each other, you know, constantly.
Yeah.
Well, and then go back and have a private meeting and say, well, you know, Uncle Lewis didn't do that. He didn't talk. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Then you're going to try to tear tear it down.
You know, and if I did that, which I never did, but I would have to ask myself, what did I want?
Yeah,
what was, you know, and back following up what he said, if you know, it's not about what you expect.
Right.
It's about what is.
What it is.
What it is.
What it is.
It's about, you know, even with all the open secrets I would have or ask questions about, it wasn't about what the answer would be.
Right.
It was just about the answer.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure.
If you, I process vulnerabilities for myself. So if I'm going to open a door, I got to be able to deal with what's on the other side of the door. Right. So, and if it's something that if it's again, you're right. A lot of us are grown up with cousins that aren't cousins.
Right.
You know, not by blood. But they're cousins by life experiences.
Right.
So when you can match the two together to where the blood matches the spirit and the DNA matches the love, what else? You know, no, I can't say he's well, I can say he's not our dad. Yeah. We're not our dad. But, we can say that. But we are brothers.
But I knew so early on and accepted it so early on, I think even before my children, because they did, even though they told me about it initially, one or two of them was half-stepping a little bit. You know what I mean?
Well, did you ever have Did you ever have any knowledge of thinking that you had siblings?
No. No. I didn't.
So I knew that I had a brother, but you didn't know.
They had before them.
Okay.
They were brothers and sisters.
Right.
I never had a brother.
But you never thought that you had brothers, sisters. You never.
No.
Thought you were only child.
I was a, you know.
Yeah. And see, and the complete opposite of that. I grew up with 11 siblings, and my grandmother's in my ear saying, "You got another brother. You got another brother."
Yeah.
You know? So I knew that since I was 13. You know.
Yeah.
And the only thing I will go into is your Uncle Fred.
Right.
See, that's the other thing too that confuses a little bit. My dad had a brother named Fred. Then he had a son named Fred, who had a son named Fred. You know? It's like the old TV show with the comedian Daryl. This is my brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl. Yeah. So, and I did meet my Uncle Fred when I was 20.
Yeah.
And I told Fred about it. I've been looking for somebody in my brother's family, my dad's family, for years. And I come to find that my Uncle Fred worked in a liquor store 3 blocks from my house.
Right.
3 blocks from the house.
Right.
And I was 18. I walked into the liquor store one day, couldn't buy nothing, but he's a tall guy. He's still like a big guy. He's a tall guy, which is crazy because Pop was short.
Yeah.
But I walked in, and before I could get a word out, I was going to say something. Say, "Hey, I know who you are." He said, "Have a good life."
Yeah.
I said,
what
okay.
the hell? He felt he saw a semblance.
I guess.
Yeah.
He never asked me my
Because
name.
nobody who would have told him ahead of time.
He never asked me my name.
Yeah.
He just looked up, he saw me, and I was the next in line.
Right.
Not like I was going to purchase anything, but I was going to say, "Hey, my name." I was going to say, "Hey, my name is," and he's like,
Yeah.
I know y'all.
Yeah.
Blew me away.
Yeah.
But again, I'm a mad kid. You know, I'm like, okay, here's blood, but blood doesn't see me.
Right.
You know, and I used to drive by in Philadelphia. There was a banks called Bailey Banks and Biddle, a corporation in Philadelphia. Or maybe there was a law firm. I don't know. But I just wonder if that Bailey was anything to do with me.
But I learned a lot of discipline from Detroit. He taught me. I was always asking for money.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted an allowance.
Okay.
He didn't want to give me an allowance. And then I understood why. He gave me a 1952 Mercury.
What age were you asking for allowance, though?
Well, he gave me this Mercury.
Okay. How old were you?
I was in Northeast High School at the time.
So you had a car in high school.
Took out the railing inside, hung a clothes rack in there. He said, "Now I'm gonna show you how to make some money.
Yeah.
All them brothers you in there be strolling up and down the street with their slick clothes.
Yeah. Bring
them to me. I'll clean them.
Okay, that's right.
And I'll charge you what I charge you know what I mean?
And you can hang them up in the back of your car.
Yeah.
Hustling.
And he said, "I'm gonna tell you one thing. If your math is wrong, tough titties."
You gonna keep your money. I do it. That's the one time I did see him. Was Mickey and I went to his dry cleaners. He has some kind of dry cleaners, and that's the only time I remember seeing him. And I got my ass whipped because he had a gun underneath the counter. Yeah. And one of us, I guess it was me, one of us picked it up. Yeah. But that was the only thing I saw. Yeah. I did remember, I told you, I did remember when I got old enough. See, guys, here's the other thing. Back in the 70s, you could walk into bars at 18 or 19.
Oh, yeah.
Easily. And I would go into bars and buy drinks for some people that I heard were his friends. Yeah. Just to find out anything about him.
Right.
You know.
And most of the local bars, at night, they had crap games in there.
Yeah.
Because the money wasn't in liquor.
No, the money's in gambling.
Yeah.
And girls serving drinks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, listen, man. This is something we got to get back to. So listen, guys. I'm going to end up with a little Coltrane. Because you like Coltrane. You tell me you like Coltrane.
Okay.
And this is my favorite things.
Yeah.
The relationship grows. It keeps going.
Right.
Because we want it to.
Right.
Firstly. And that's the way it is. But some of the open secrets you can get answers to. Some of them you're not. But it doesn't matter if you get a relationship out of it.
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
We're going to do another podcast where we might get a little bit more detail about some other things. But right now, I just wanted you to meet Fred. I wanted you to invite you to this new space that I'm creating. And I wanted you to thank the third generation of this Bailey crew for producing this. That's my son, Brandon.
Absolutely.
So we're building legacies here. But we're also building some foundation for our family in the future. Thank you for listening. Again, this is called The Work is the Work, but I'm also still doing the Talk It Out podcast on the audio version. This will be the new YouTube page. Thank you for listening. Thank you for talking on camera, Fred.
Thank you for accepting me in your home.
Yeah. Thank you for accepting me in your life.
Yeah.
So, because I'm a full load. You know? But I'm at a full load, so we're good. We're good.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. Have a blessed and wonderful day.
What you think, man?
I like that. That was smooth.